China seems to be in the headlines for every political disagreement. I'm talking like Republican versus Democrat, or really just any political conversation all around the world. And I get why it needs to be. China is a massive force in the world now, and it is not necessarily a force of good, especially if we're talking about the Chinese government. I'm kind of tired of headlines saying that Democrats are just like China, or Republicans are trying to have authoritarianism just like China. Can we stop all that? Because I want to tell you today why China shouldn't be a role model or example for really anyone. And I'm particularly talking to the people that are maybe leaning more towards the whole neoliberalism side of thing or socialist side of thing. Now, this is not going to be a slight on socialism or communism or capitalism or whatever. If you're any of those things, that's totally perfectly fine. It's your God-given right to be one of those things. This is not going to be pro-left, it's not going to be pro-right, it's not going to be an anti-liberal or anti-conservative argument, it's not going to be any of those things. In fact, just to clear the air, something I've avoided doing for a long time now, I'm just going to throw out my political affiliation. I don't have one, okay? I'm not on either side of anything. And just to prove that to you, I'm going to throw up my political compass here and show you that I am somewhere really just in the middle. I'm smack dab in the middle of everything. I would consider myself a true moderate in terms of most issues, maybe slightly, just a tiny smidge hair to the left as opposed to the right. And then also I would tend to favor more of a hands-off, government hands-off aspect over an authoritarian aspect. But other than that, I'm pretty much smack dab in the middle. So you couldn't really get any less biased than me going into this. In fact, I want to make this video because I'm just tired of people using China as an example of how a government works correctly. Everything I see flies in the face of reality. I lived in China for 10 years, and let me tell you, China is not the example for successful governance. I did not live in the country for 10 years because I thought the government was good. And for those of you who are looking to China as some sort of bastion of success on how well they take care of their citizens, let me tell you, that just means you've lapped up the absolutely ridiculous propaganda of the Chinese government itself. And this is definitely not gonna be a preachy video about, oh, I've seen the world and let me tell you how good you have it already in your own country. No, I get it. My own country, the USA, has massive issues to overcome. You just need to pick a different place as a role model. That's my only point. Let me break this down. I made a list of things that, in free countries that most of us would expect the government to do to take care of its citizens. Today's video is brought to you by Noom. I started using the Noom program to drop a little weight and start eating more healthy, and I gotta say, I'm actually very impressed. You just take a free 30-second quiz to get started, which you can do at noom.com/Laowinner, and it gets your goals in order. It sets you up with a psychological-based approach tailored to your own needs, and it keeps you on track. I love it because it's not some flash-in-the-pan weight loss tool. It's a toolkit to actually change how you look at nutrition, fitness, and it tells you why and how to be healthier. I love that it's super easy to add foods to your log, and it teaches you what foods you should eat more or less of and why that is. You also get a real human coach that is there at all times to message you, and you can get advice and encouragement from them. It's a really, really personal experience, and I've already noticed a huge drastic improvement in what I eat. I feel a lot better, and I've already lost about 10 pounds. Go to noom.com/Laowinner and take the free 30-second quiz to get started now. First of all, let's look at wealth distribution. The average person in America makes $53,490 a year, right? In China, the average person earns $15,249 per year. Now, I get that. China is much, much, much poorer than the US, despite what they would like you to think. But you know what makes this scary is that the poverty threshold in the US is $12,760 per year. I think most of you would agree, especially if you're in America, that if you made less than 12 grand per year, you're pretty damn poor, right? The poverty threshold in China is not equivalent. Do you know how much it is? It's about $400 per year. So you hear this argument, especially from people that use China as an example of how good socialism is or how good their government takes care of them, as a country that's lifted everyone out of poverty. Well, yeah, that's great. Fantastic job that you allowed people to make $400 or more a year. The countryside of China is absolutely devastatingly poor in a lot of areas. I've traveled the entire country on the back of a motorcycle, predominantly on back roads. I've seen absolute abject poverty, and it has not just miraculously gone away. The countryside where people actually try to make ends meet in China is pure despair. And not to mention, maybe the worst part for people that want to live in a society where everyone has an even playing field, and use America as the example of that not being it. The social status and restrictive caste system of China is diametrically opposed to the USA, where at least you have a fighting chance of someone treating you like a human being, even if you're poor. In China, there is no charity. It's the least charitable country in the entire world. And you'd think there would be some sort of government to back it up, right? Okay, there's no charity, but at least the government gives handouts. No, absolutely not. And people treat each other like absolute garbage when they are below their status. If you have a middle class person or an upper class person that's around a poor person, they treat them like trash by and large. It's just the way it is. It's basically an economic caste system. Stop using China as an example for a free and fair economic system. The inequality is astronomically worse than the US. And talk about equality, women's equality. Women's equality is so bad. This is such a chauvinistic society. I remember how many times I had to console my wife when she came home. She worked in a big company. They basically trampled on her in the workplace, and she's a very confident woman. There are women all over the country that feel completely restricted in what they do because China is such a male-driven society. Look at how many women are in positions of power in democracies. Look at Europe, look at the US. There are tons of women that are political leaders and have political power. In China, there are almost none. It is a very, very male-driven society, and it's done through bullying and chauvinism. Let me tell you, if sexism or chauvinism is a major concern of yours, I can honestly tell you that China is not going to win any points in that section. The upwards mobility in China for a woman is very low. That is a low ceiling. And the massive amounts of sexual abuse and sexism that women have to face in China is pretty disturbing. If you want to talk about free education, we're always talking about this debate in the US about whether universities should be free or not. Well, in China, you don't even get to go to high school for free. It's in the Constitution that you get 9 years of education for free. But let me tell you, that's not actually true. See, what they do to get around that is they say, yeah, your first 9 years of education are free, so you don't have to pay tuition. But you still have to pay other fees, which actually just end up being what that tuition would be anyway. So there's all ways around it. You have to buy these books, you have to pay these miscellaneous costs, these placement costs. There's other types of school fees that you have to pay. Now, when you're in high school, you just have to pay straight up tuition. It's not free for anyone. So I don't know why we're looking at China as a bastion of socialism for people to go to school for free. It's just not the case. Free hospitals. What about free healthcare? Now that is a huge debate in the US as well. I don't even know if it's a debate. I feel like most people could get behind the fact that the US and the system of healthcare that we have here is absolutely broken. Yes, we have a high grade of medical technology. We have a high skill level amongst doctors. We have a good medical system in terms of the infrastructure of it. However, how much people have to pay, the insurance system, the government insurance system, the healthcare system in general, and your access to it is awful. It's terrible. Europe and Canada and all these places tend to make the US very, very embarrassed when it comes to this kind of stuff. That being said, you'd think a socialist country like China, the People's Republic of China, would have a universal healthcare system, right? No. Absolutely not. You better be ready to pay up front. You might get bankrupted if you get cancer or something in the US, but you can't be refused treatment. And if you're poor enough, you will get some government assistance. No one's gonna let you bleed out on the stoop of your house because you can't afford to go to the hospital. But guess what? In China, you better pay up front. You have to pay up front before you seek medical attention because it is not free. There is a government healthcare insurance that does not cover everything, and it really depends on your employer, to be honest. In fact, a lot of medical services, although a lot of basic ones are quite cheap, they are not up to Western standards at all. In fact, I got better healthcare treatment when I was in Thailand and even in Laos compared to China, both countries that are quite a bit less developed than China. The Chinese healthcare system is full of bribery and corruption, which means a lot of the doctors don't even have proper degrees. You have to pay up front, and you might not get the treatment that saves your life. Not to mention the fact that there's no frickin' soap in the bathrooms. Government housing? Well, have a look at this area. This area that I'm riding through here, this is government housing. And guess what? This is in a good area, in a good city. Most places don't even get this benefit. Do you know how this works? It's absolutely crazy. My old neighbor, he's an old man, he had a caretaker, and she lived in this area. She was probably about in her mid-40s. Now, she got this government housing, and it's not free, by the way, it's just discounted. And it's a box. It's like a concrete box covered in mold. No joke. And the only reason she got this is because the city I lived in has good favor with the government. So if you live in a place that doesn't have good favor with the central government or provincial government, you're not getting any welfare to give to your citizens. So we're talking about welfare, we're talking about stipends, pensions, housing, all this kind of stuff. You don't get that kind of stuff universally across China. The Chinese government doesn't take care of its citizens. They don't just give people welfare and housing, especially if you're in a place that's not in good favors with Beijing or the provincial government. So I lived in a place that sucked up to the government, often got awards for being such a suck up to the central government. The only way your town gets these benefits for its poor citizens is if your town or city or village has something CCP officials want. I have had to go to government meetings, whether it be with family members or people I know, or just being the token white guy in the crowd, where people go to seaside villages, for example. There's a seaside village I have in mind where they actually got some welfare and some really cheap housing for their poor citizens, and I'll tell you why. Because of bribery and corruption. CCP officials love to drink thousands and thousands of dollars of cognac and eat seafood. So if you provide those things, then all of a sudden your town has more stipend to give its poor citizens. And that's just how it works. It's like crony capitalism mixed with authoritarianism. I have absolutely no idea how people are looking to China for an example, a positive example on this front. What about when you retire? Well, pension and retirement should be a ubiquitous thing in a communist or socialist country, right? Well, it depends on where you live. If you live in Shanghai, which most people don't, big, huge city, metropolitan city, if you have a Shanghai household registration, meaning that you're allowed to live there, because I forgot to tell you guys, China has a hukou system, a household registration system, meaning you can only live and work where your registration is from. This is a huge hangover from the Mao Zedong, like Chairman Mao era time. You can't live in another place unless an employer or someone changes your hukou or your household registration. So if you're from Shanghai and you're a privileged ass person with a local household registration there, yeah, you might get like $1,000 a month or even more when you retire. Now, I lived in a decent city, not Shanghai, but let me tell you what happens there. A family member that I know, they had to go bribe, I kid you not, they had to go bribe the local government office to change their work history transcript to make it look like they did more for society, because they were like some repairman, right? Just to get $150 a month. I kid you not. So a normal person couldn't go down there and apply because they didn't do anything for society. They were just a repairman, or they did stuff on the side, or they were too sick to work, or whatever. Only if they did things that contributed to society and bribed the people to actually officially change their transcripts could they get that pension. The rest of the country barely gets anything. We're talking about a high-level city here. What about homelessness? I mean, this is a massive issue. When I lived in California, I saw homelessness everywhere, and it was appalling. It's like one of the scourges of the US. It's terrible. It's also well documented and reported. Not saying any of the efforts are actually working out as well as they should be, but at least it's not a secret. Well, in China, there's homeless people, guys. There's no government places where they stash these people and take care of them. They don't take care of their people so well so as to eradicate homelessness. They literally get rid of them and make them disappear. If you're in a city center where there's some government officials coming through, they'll get the homeless people and put them inside of buses and bus them out into the middle of nowhere and make them get out of the bus. I'm not even joking. But when it's not government official time, there are homeless people everywhere. There's people without limbs, there's people with huge mental health issues, bashing their heads against walls, run around naked, screaming and touching people. There's kids that have been burned, literally burned, and had their arms and legs chopped off, that have been kidnapped from their parents to go be forced beggars and homeless on the side of the road. And nobody does anything about it. No one. Do you know how many times I had to avert my gaze because I can't do anything about it? I want to go help a kid that's a burn victim child where its limbs are just stumps. And I can't do anything because you know what? The first time when I went to go tell the police, they completely ignored me. Because that is not an issue in China that anyone wants to deal with. I told you about the caste system. It's a real thing. And people get away with disgusting, heinous crimes. Homelessness is the least of people's worries. Speaking of mental health, nobody believes in it there. Well, at least the infrastructure doesn't. There's barely any facilities to deal with depression or suicide or schizophrenia or psychosis or any of these things that people normally deal with, because nobody believes in it. It's not a real thing. And if it is a thing, oh, you're just crazy, right? Doctors are not trained for this, and the government is not set up to help people with mental problems. If you're on antidepressants or something like this, you better not go to China. You know what's been a hot topic recently? Police brutality. I mean, look at all the protests that people had across the United States to protest against police brutality. And I get it. The military armament of police is probably not a good thing. You know what's even worse? China. The cops get away with anything. One time I had a transgression with a taxi driver. I went to the police station and they had a guy strung up by his ankles and were whipping him with a pole. And guess what? That wasn't documented. He wasn't in jail. They weren't trying to interrogate him. They were just messing around with him after they caught him putting up illegal flyers around the city. Guess what? He didn't have a local hukou, like a local household registration system, so he's unregistered. They can do whatever they want, and they do whatever they want, to the point where they didn't even try to hide it in front of me, a foreigner. Police get away with putting people in literal tiger chairs, like medieval stockades. Police get away with disappearing people, beating up old women. Police get away with this in China because they are given ultimate power. Do you understand? There's no avenue for people to fight police aggression or police transgressions. If something happens to you at the hands of a police, you're screwed unless you have enough government connections to make your problems go away. To go back on the protest thing, there is no protest in China. Well, there is. You just don't hear about it. And those people that organize those protests, they're disappeared or they're jailed. Freedom of expression and assembly is not a right in China. In fact, the Chinese government is terrified of any expression and assembly. Music lyrics have to be approved by the central government. Art is censored constantly. In fact, most of the internet is completely censored because they don't want Chinese people to participate in international dialogue. And freedom of assembly to get up and say, hey, government, I am actually not happy with what you did, is completely illegal. So I hope you like keeping your mouth shut, especially with issues of racism and issues of sexism or any issues of social injustice, because you're not allowed to talk about them. Recently in Texas, it's been a huge debate about reproductive rights. Well, in China, you don't have to worry about that at all because you don't have any. First, it was the one-child policy, and I used to see this all over the countryside. There were little government buildings where they would have women having forced abortions inside. They would actually take people to the building and make them have forced abortions, or if they had had too many kids and gotten away with it, they would just force sterilize them. And they still do this, by the way, especially with ethnic minorities that they don't want to reproduce anymore. They do force sterilize them. Now people can have 2 or 3 children, but don't think that that is reproductive rights, because now it's going in the other direction. Now they're trying to limit how many abortions you can have because there's a demographic crisis in China right now. They want people to have more and more kids to displace the fact that there's tons and tons of old people. It's a disaster waiting to happen, so now they're taking away abortion rights. It goes both ways. It might get to a point where they're punishing people for not having children. Speaking of rights, what about gay rights or trans rights or LGBT? All of these things, yes, they exist in China, but they are not enshrined in law. In China, it is illegal to portray homosexuality in media or art. In fact, it's not even just for gay people. Effeminate males are not allowed to be effeminate anymore. They censor earrings on TV, for God's sakes. I don't know why the Chinese government is the bastion of progression when they hate gay people. Do you understand? It's not a place where gay and trans people have any sort of right or recourse. The be all and end all is, in China, your success in life is directly linked to your government connections. You have to be a crony capitalist mixed with a disgusting authoritarian despot. When you look at China or you pay attention to the propaganda, you know what you get? You get shiny buildings and nice looking city centers from a distance. That's what you get. And you also get new roads. Wow, you get these beautiful highways that, by the way, are not free. They cost a lot of money. Every single highway in China costs money and it's very expensive to drive on. Nothing is tax-free. Everything is paid for. China is not a country where the government is just handing stuff out to people. China is not a liberal utopia. In fact, I hate to say this, it's actually kind of crazy to hear, but the USA is already far more socialist than China. China is a very conservative country. They're not experimenting with progression here, guys. It's not a place to go live out your Marxist dreams. The government hates gay people, trans rights, protests, and doesn't offer any social stability unless you keep your head down, your mouth shut, and you're happy with low wages and little to no upwards mobility unless you are a corrupt official. If you're genuinely into like neoliberalism or socialism, then China is not for you.